Welcome back. This is 9th grade world history. My name is Coach Spivey, and this is the fourth of 5 lessons covering 9th grade world history. Today we're going to start looking at critical standard number 3. So let's take a look at what critical standard number 3 is. This standard is to describe causes and consequences of World War II. Causes and consequences. Now, just to kind of set the table, our focus will strictly be on the causes, and then we'll get into World War II, and then we'll finish it up next time with kind of the end of World War II as well as some of the consequences of it. In order for us to understand the causes of World War II, we're going to have to revisit the past 2 standards that we covered and kind of tie it all together, because there were some things that happened in World War I that led to World War II. And there were some things in that worldwide Great Depression that we talked about that led to World War II as well. And then there were some acts of aggression. And so let's look at each one of these individually and see if we can kind of determine the causes of World War II. So if you remember when we talked about World War I at the end, when they were trying to figure out what Europe would be like afterwards and try to resolve some of the conflict and set some terms of peace, they came up with what was called the Treaty of Versailles. And if you remember, when we were talking about the consequences of World War I, in that Treaty of Versailles, there were 2 nations that were not there, did not participate. One was Russia and the other was Germany. And so let's look at some of these and see if we can tie it and maybe make some connections to why that might have caused World War II. Germany lost some land. That would surely upset them. There would be a desire to get back that land that they had lost. There were severe military restrictions on Germany, limiting the size and what they could have and not have. And obviously, if you're trying to build a nation back, a strong military is one of those things that you would need. And so this upset Germany as well. And obviously the one that probably upset them more than any others is in that Treaty of Versailles, they had to claim sole responsibility for World War I, and not only that, but pay reparations to the Allies. One other thing is that the Treaty of Versailles did is the development of the League of Nations, which was supposed to be that international peacekeeping organization, and we'll see the ineffectiveness of the League of Nations to prevent some of these lead-up things to World War II. So World War I and the consequences of it led directly to World War II as well. And I want to look at the land as well. This map over here represents pre-World War I, and this map on the right is post-World War I. And I just want you to notice a couple of things. Look at Germany over here and Russia over here and Austria-Hungary. Germany and Austria-Hungary, if you remember, were central powers. But look, Austria-Hungary completely split up. Germany lost land over here, and Russia, now the Soviet Union, lost all of this land as well. So when people lose things that they had, obviously that's going to leave a legacy of bitterness. So not only did World War I cause World War II, but also that depression that hit in the 1930s. And this was a significant loss of, well, economic power and money, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. And sometimes when times are hard and things don't go well and there's economic depression, people are going to look to strong leaders to provide hope, to kind of get things moving in the right direction. So these hard times gave space for strong leaders to emerge. And sometimes like in the United States, with the example of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, these were good leaders, did really good things, instituted some of his New Deal policies that got the country moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, sometimes when things hit, it gives rise to these strong leaders that aren't necessarily really good guys, like Benito Mussolini in Italy, or Adolf Hitler in Germany. or Emperor Hirohito of Japan. And you'll see in each one of these countries, they were able to galvanize the people for their cause, good or bad, to try to get the country headed in the right direction. So the Great Depression gave way to some powerful leaders in the world, a direct cause of World War II. And then the final one that we want to look at, there were some certain acts of aggression that led up to, and you could really even say that World War II started here, but were definitely causes of World War II. So let's look at these acts of aggression. We'll look first at the acts of aggression by Japan, then Italy and Germany. Japan. This is a map of East Asia and the Pacific. All these little dots represent little islands and stuff, but let's zoom in right here to Japan. So this is Japan, and actually they occupied the Korean Peninsula as well. Well, if things are not going good, like they were in the Great Depression, you need more resources, more land, more power, more wealth. And so what they did is they invaded the mainland in an area known as Manchuria. Well, if you remember, the League of Nations was supposed to prevent acts of atrocity like this. So what did they do? The League of Nations protested. Japan, you shouldn't do that. That's wrong. And we don't like that in Japan. What did they do? They're like, so what? I'm out. And they just left the League of Nations. And the League of Nations was like, oh, shoot, what do we do about that? And this was the beginning of the ineffectiveness of the League of Nations to prevent what would become World War II. Not only after they withdrew from the League of Nations, they had already occupied Manchuria, and then they invaded China itself. Well, of course, other nations in the world were standing by watching this. And Italy was like, well, if Japan's getting theirs, we're going to get ours too. And so what did they do? Italy invaded one of the only places in Africa to remain free of European control during imperialism, and that was Ethiopia. Italy invaded Ethiopia. What did the League of Nations do? They condemned the attack. That's bad, Italy. What did Italy do? Did what they wanted to do. They just conquered Ethiopia anyway. And so this international peacekeeping organization showed further that they were ineffective to stop these acts of aggression. And then finally, let's look at Germany. Germany, seeing all this going on, severely affected by the Treaty of Versailles. What did they do? Well, they openly defied the treaty. We're going to build up our military. You said we can't have a military, we're going to build it up anyway. What you going to do? You didn't do anything to Italy, didn't do anything to Japan, certainly you're going to not do anything to us. And they were right. They built up their military in defiance of the Treaty of Versailles. Then they took an area known as the Rhineland. Let me zoom in and show you where this is. So this is Germany and then France, and right along the Rhine River, it's not pictured here, there's this little area called the Rhineland. The Treaty of Versailles that said that area had to be demilitarized just for safety for France, right? Germany couldn't have military here, but they moved military in there and occupied that region anyway. What do you think the League of Nations did? I don't even have to say, you already know. What else? Not only did they commit these acts of aggression, but they joined with Italy and Japan in an alliance called the Axis Powers. And the idea was Germany would kind of take control over mainland Europe. Italy would take control over the Mediterranean region and North Africa. And then Japan would take control of the Pacific. So what was the world's response? Well, we know what the League of Nations did, ineffective. The nations' response, or the nations of the world, particularly Britain and France, was this idea of appeasement. That was their response to all these acts of aggression. Well, what is appeasement? Appeasement is giving in to an aggressor to keep peace. So I'm going to give in to Italy or Japan or Germany in order to keep the peace and not prevent a further war from happening. Well, this doesn't work. But let's look at a political cartoon to kind of see if we can understand it. Before we look at the cartoon, let me kind of set the scene for you. Imagine you're in a grocery store and you got a young child with their mother, and the young child is screaming, crying for some candy. And they reach up there and grab candy, and mom's like, no, you can't have that. And then the child just throwing down a for sure temper tantrum. And the mom's like, okay, you can have the candy, but that's it, no more. And the child's like, okay, yeah, that's it. I just want the candy. And they go to the next aisle, and there's this awesome cereal that they want. And they start screaming for the cereal. Mom's like, oh, no, you can't have that. And throwing a temper tantrum. Okay, here's the cereal. Just to try to pacify them, to prevent further aggression, right? This political cartoon represents that. You got Hitler here as a baby. He's pitching a fit, doing all these things he shouldn't do, acts of aggression. This is the Prime Minister, Prime Minister of Great Britain right here, saying, shh, be quiet now, maybe. And Europe's hoping that he'll just stop. And this is the whole idea of appeasement. We're going to give in to stop a future war. Let's see what it looks like specifically in action. First example, Germany took the Rhineland. What did Britain and France do? They let Hitler have it. So here is that little Rhineland. Now Germany's beginning to expand. Okay, you can have that, but nothing else. Example 2. Germany annexed Austria. Now, Austria wasn't necessarily upset about this. There was a lot of German people and German-speaking people in Austria that identified with Germany, but it was against the Treaty of Versailles, and they just took it, moved in, and annexed it anyway. Britain and France, appeasement, let Hitler do it. And so now they annexed Austria, beginning to expand, right? Example 3. Germany seized a part of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. Czechs asked France for help. Please help us. What did France do? Sorry, we're going to have to try to keep the peace, and if it costs a little bit of land in Czechoslovakia, we're willing to give that up. Some of the leaders of Great Britain, France, and Germany met at the Munich conference. The Munich conference, they did not invite Czechoslovakia, but at that conference they basically said, look, you can have the Sudetenland, but no more. This is it, right? You've done the Rhineland, you've annexed Austria, you've taken this land, but we're going to give you this, but no more. And they thought for sure this is it. And so when they annexed this area of the Sudetenland, they thought, okay, it's over with, there's peace. Well, if you give an inch, they're going to take a mile. Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia. Italy took Albania. And the response? Nothing. Nothing. And what we see is appeasement didn't work. They took the rest of Czechoslovakia. Italy took Albania. So that's what appeasement looked like in action. Not only was appeasement going on, but as Germany's act of aggression, I guess, they signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. Basically, we're not going to attack you, you don't attack us. And they actually had a little side agreement that they would actually divide Poland. And so all of these acts of aggression were causes of World War II. So let's back up, and now let's look at World War II itself. And as we look at World War II, this is just going to be like a 10,000-foot flyover. We're not going to have time to look at the individual battles necessarily, or some of the people or stories, and you could go on. And I wish we had time to see some videos. There's some fantastic movies about World War II. There's a great museum in New Orleans if you ever get a chance to visit. But we're not going to be able to dive down into the depths because of time constraints. But I just want to give you a feel and a flavor of World War II. Obviously, World War II occurred on two parts of the globe, right? In Europe, and we'll call this the European theater, with Italy and Germany, but also with Japan and the Pacific. So we're going to look at the European theater and the Pacific theater. Let's start with Europe. So the official first start, or the official start, was when Germany invaded their neighbor Poland, September the 1st, 1939. And this was the official start to the war. Just to kind of give you a visual, Germany here, Soviet Union here, and Germany invaded Poland. Now when they invaded Poland, they used this new military strategy called blitzkrieg. So let's look and see what blitzkrieg is. Blitzkrieg is, if I translate it from German, literally means lightning war. It's essentially, I'm going to bring in a surprising and overwhelming force. Practically what it looked like, they came in with waves and waves of planes as they dropped bombs and attacked, followed by tanks, and you get the picture here, huge waves of tanks coming in, followed by infantry soldiers. We actually, if you pay attention to football at all, you've probably heard of a defense blitzing. And essentially what that is we're going to bring a sudden, right, and surprising, overwhelming force. I'm going to bring more people than the offense is able to block. And that's where we get that term blitz. And this military strategy proved extremely effective, not only in Poland, but as you'll see later as Germany invaded other parts as well. As Germany was invading Poland from the west, the Soviet Union attacked from the east and then turned north to retake some of the lands that they lost in World War I, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Finland. So as Germany attacked from the west, Soviet Union from the east, and then they turned up and went through Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and Finland. What was the response? Well, they invaded September the 1st. France, Great Britain declared war on September the 3rd. And they set up their defenses along what would be called the Maginot Line. Had a nickname, it was called the Phony War. This Maginot Line was between the border between France and Germany. Germany had forces on this side, France had forces on this side, and they were just kind of waiting for the other to make the first move. So while they were occupied there, Germany went north, took Denmark and Norway, while France and Great Britain were paying attention to that border between France and Germany. So as they were paying attention here, Germany went north through Denmark and Norway for the plan of being able to launch an attack on the Great Britain itself. And then Germany went through, let me back up, and then Germany, after taking Denmark and Norway, turned and went through the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. But then they went through this densely forested area called the Ardennes, which France did not think they'd be able to do, and it took them by surprise. And so they went through the Netherlands and Belgium and through all this and through the Ardennes as well, bypassing this defensive Maginot Line. And when they did, those forces surrounded the British and French forces and pushed them all the way back to the French coast. And one of the coolest stories of World War II is this miracle at Dunkirk. So as the forces, I'm going to zoom in here, as the forces, German forces pushed British and French soldiers back to the coast, there was this little coastal city called Dunkirk. And it was there at Dunkirk that nearly 400,000 soldiers were trapped on the beaches. And they were rescued across the English Channel there, nearly 1,000 boats, and I put boats in quotation because, yes, there were some military boats, but any seaworthy vessel, fishing ship, cargo ship, whatever people had, began to rescue these soldiers from the coastline. You can see a picture here. This is just a regular cargo boat. This is a picture of the beaches there at Dunkirk. It's a cool story. There's a movie called Dunkirk. So after they pushed all those troops out, France stood no chance, and it wasn't long before France fell itself. And so June 14th, 1940, Germans made it all the way to Paris, and just a few days later, France surrendered. So who's left? Well, there's nobody left except for Britain. And so the Battle of Britain began, and because they're not connected by land, there had to be a different strategy, and so the German Air Force, called the Luftwaffe, started bombing in the summer of 1940, started with military targets, and then started bombing cities just to try to demoralize the British people. The British people were able to stay strong. They had a strong air force of their own called the Royal Air Force. But the British had two advantages. One was called radar, stands for radio detection and ranging, to let them know where planes were, which direction they were headed, how fast they were going, so they could tell where they are and make better plans. And then they intercepted this German coding machine called the Enigma. And so with those two advantages, they were able to actually, over the course, not necessarily win, but at least block the German forces. And it taught the Allies a lesson that Hitler can be blocked. So when he gave up at the Battle of, not gave up, but Hitler began to turn his attention elsewhere. And so where did he turn his attention? So I'm going to come back to Britain later. He turned his attention to North Africa. Italy had started fighting the British in North Africa, couldn't really handle it. Germany sent in reinforcements and fought back and forth with the British in North Africa right here. And then they turned to the Balkans. Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary actually, instead of fighting against, actually joining. If you can't beat them, join them. So they joined the Axis powers. Yugoslavia and Greece decided they were going to try to fight. Didn't work out too well for them. They were both conquered in just a matter of days. Right here, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and then Yugoslavia and Greece were conquered. What about the Soviet Union? I thought that there was a non-aggression pact. Nope. Germany invaded the Soviet Union in something called Operation Barbarossa. And on June 22nd, 1941, they invaded the Soviet Union and went against this non-aggression pact. The Soviets used this idea called scorched earth strategy. Basically, as we retreat, we're going to burn and destroy everything in our path so that they don't have reinforcements and supplies along the way. And then the Germans began to set a siege on Leningrad, some horrific stories about that. But the thing that saved the Russians was wintertime. The Russian winter set in and stopped the attack. But as you can see, all the light purple here represents the area controlled by the Axis powers. Leningrad. So they controlled essentially the entire continent of Europe. What was the U.S. response? We're going to stay out of it, isolationism. Then they adopted this thing called cash and carry. Look, you come and pay us for it and you carry it, you can have it. Then eventually when that wasn't working, they decided that we're going to try to lend and lease. We're going to lend them some equipment and lease it to them. Certainly we're on the side of France and Great Britain in this. But then the German submarines began to attack these ships that were sending the equipment. And in 1941, September 1941, a U.S. destroyer was attacked. And so then the order was given, look, just shoot down any German sub that you come in contact with without warning. So even though U.S. isn't officially in the war at this time, they've started at least wartime procedures. Let's take a quick look at the Pacific theater, and we'll try this as quickly as possible. Well, the Japanese began to look at European colonies in the Pacific. They conquered French Indochina, and obviously the U.S. territories of the Philippines and Guam were threatened, but they took French Indochina. U.S. involvement, we're going to send aid to China. Well, that didn't help. When they attacked French Indochina, they cut oil shipments to Japan after the attack of French Indochina. I tell you what, we're going to pause here because we're running out of time. And we're going to pick up where the U.S. officially got involved with the war at Pearl Harbor. And we'll look at the kind of how the tide turned and shifted in favor of the Allies, and look at some of the consequences of World War II itself. Thank you so much. Look forward to being with you again next week as we look at some of the causes and consequences of World War II.